I'm Akash, and this is your News of the Week for the week of July 11th to July 17th, 2021. Let's begin by taking a look at our headlines for the stories this week. First off, Democrats in the Texas House of Representatives have fled to Washington in order to prevent the passage of a major bill. Stay tuned for more info on this very interesting story. The next topic we're going to discuss about this week actually relates to the fact that COVID-19 is steadily growing in the United States of America. Next, unprecedented and unforeseen European floods kill at least 130 people in West Europe. Let's talk about that story in just a bit. It's very much breaking and it's very interesting and dangerous. The next story we're going to talk about relates to the anti-government protests that are happening in Cuba as people are taking to the streets in protest of the Communist Party of Cuba, which has led the country for the past while. Now, the next story I want to talk about is the fact that all is set for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics in 2021. It's been a lot of hassles throughout the time. We'll take a look at how we managed to get to this point with the Tokyo Olympics. The next story I want to talk about is that the finals of the Uefa's Euro 2020 soccer tournament took place on July 11th. Let's see who won. Find out at the time when we talk about it in just a moment. But first, we'll finish off with our last two stories. Here are the headlines for the last two, and these are space related. First of all, Jeff Bezos, you heard that right? Jeff Bezos is going to space, along with the youngest and oldest people to go to space. This is going to be quite an exciting story. And finally, the Hubble Space Telescope, after a month of inactivity and malfunctioning, it is back in business. Now that we've taken a look at all the stories that we're going to be covering this week, let's take a look in further detail. And we begin with the fact that on July 12th, most Democrats of the Texas House of Representatives fled to Washington, D.C. in order to prevent the passage of a major voting restrictions bill. So what happened was that in the previous days, the Republicans in both the Texas House and Texas Senate had officially created bills, and these are voting restrictions bills. So the goals are to eliminate some of the problems. And what the Republicans have done here is start banning 24-hour voting and drive-through voting. They're adding new mail-in voter ID restrictions and requirements, and so on and so forth. So there's some brand new restrictions and requirements that have been put into place with these new voting bills for Texas. So the thing is, although the Texas GOP liked them, the Democratic Party is not that fond of them and instead wanted to advocate their own. So eventually it came to the point where, since the Republicans have a majority in the Texas House of Representatives, if the bill came to a vote, then it would pass through. And the Democrats didn't want that. So they used the rule of the quorum. A quorum is the minimum number of members in the House of Representatives, for example, which is needed to actually conduct proper business. So in this case, it's 100 out of 150. The thing is, if there are just 99 there, then it's not there. Only at least two-thirds should be there for proper business to be conducted. So the Democratic members of the Texas House of Representatives, who are numbered at 61, all fled out of Texas over to the capital of the USA, Washington, D.C., because now there's only roughly 80 or so members remaining in the Texas House of Representatives right now, which means, you guessed it, there is no quorum. The quorum does not exist at all now, which means that the bill cannot be passed. Now you might be wondering, why did they just leave the state? They could have just gone back to their homes. And there's a good question for that, because the thing is, they're in D.C., Now, the first major thing is that DC is federal territory. It's not owned by any state. But secondly, and most importantly, DC is not Texan territory. Like I said, it's federal territory. The official term is jurisdiction, right? So, since the DC area is not under Texas jurisdiction at all, this means that Texas can literally do nothing about these Democratic members of the Texas House of Representatives until they officially cross the border into Texas and return. So that's actually the situation that is going on right now. The Texas governor, Greg Abbott, has actually said that as soon as the Democratic members come back, he's going to arrest them and force them to attend repetitive sessions of the Texas House until the bill finally comes to a vote. So until then, the situation is still going to remain very tense. And apparently it came to the point where the leader of the Texas GOP actually chartered a flight for the Texas House Democrats to return back. So yeah, the situation still remains pretty tense, and we'll have to see what happens. Now, the next situation I want to talk about relates to COVID-19, because COVID-19 is now slowly but surely growing in the United States. Now, what has happened here is that since the start of this month, cases have increased from 4,000 to 40,000, which is, to be fair, it's quite a lot. And this is really exacerbated because of the Delta variant of the COVID-19, which has been marked as a variant of concern, as it is a very, very dangerous and highly contagious variant of COVID-19. So when asked about it, the CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, did indeed state that this virus is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated, saying that if you are unvaccinated, you remain at risk. So, wow, this situation is getting worse. And in some cases, in some places in the US, the Delta variant is responsible for nearly all of the cases in, I believe, southwestern Missouri as an example. It is getting very, very filled up with Delta, a lot of the cases. And it's not just in America either. Of course it's not. In the UK, cases have also increased over the past couple of months, now at 30,000 cases per day from 3,000 2 months ago. And yep, it's not just here either. Again, we're going to talk about Indonesia, because in fact, this is Asia's new COVID-19 epicenter. It's shifted. It's not India anymore, or China or Russia. Instead, it's Indonesia. And this is because the cases in Indonesia have risen from 9,000 to 54,000. That's sixfold. And again, the span of half a month. So this situation is getting very tense due to the COVID-19. And it's not just Delta either, it's Delta Plus that has also been rambling into the discussions of what to do with COVID-19. And I really hope that COVID-19 can finally finish soon, because it's been so long since it started. Now, the next story I want to talk about is actually quite grim. And it's actually that since July 12th, there have been major floods that have occupied a lot of Western Europe. And so this has killed 130 dead. And plus, in just one specific region of Germany alone, it's had over 1,300 found missing. So this is a very precarious conditions that are going on right now. This was actually caused by a heavy rainstorm which started in the United Kingdom. Then the rainstorm just passed over through the English Channel out into France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, all this area, before going further south into Switzerland and Austria, Liechtenstein, and also northeastern Italy. So this right now has caused a lot of problems. Multiple evacuations have taken place, and in fact, the situation has gotten so bad that multiple rivers have burst their banks, and all of the river basins have overflowed, and even worse, in one scenario in Germany, in fact, a dam broke. A dam burst open, overflowing everywhere. And there is very much a lot of concern that it's going to start, that more dams will begin to break elsewhere as a result of the pressure that's being put onto them due to these floods. This is a very precarious and it's very dangerous conditions that are happening right now. In fact, the Deutsche Wetterdienst, which is the German meteorological service, have even stated that in one area in Germany's Rhineland-Palatinate, which is where most of this is taking place, the thing is, in even one of those places, they have never seen this much rainfall in over 100 years. This is very, very dangerous, and so all of us advise to everyone involved, everyone affected, that you have to stay safe. Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone affected and involved with these floods. And I hope that these floods are going to go by very soon. It's a very dangerous and precarious conditions and the situation that's going on right now. So make sure to stay safe. Now, the next topic I want to talk about actually relates to the fact that protesters in Cuba have took to the streets to demonstrate against the government of Cuba. Anti-government protests have broken out all over Cuba as shortages of food and medicine have been occurring due to the resurgent COVID-19 situation in Cuba. So this is the major reason why these anti-government protesters are actually protesting, due to the fact that this has caused a lot of problems in the shortages that have taken place. Now, originally the Cuban government responded by saying that they weren't to blame, and instead blaming the United States for the embargoes and COVID-19, and the United States again for apparently creating the protests. But eventually, on July 14th, after 3 days of protests starting on July 11th, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel eventually admitted that yes, the Cuban government was partially to fault for the shortages that resulted in these protests, but also told Cubans not to act with hate, which is meant to be a reference to some of the rare acts of violence that occurred in various places as a result of these protests. So this is the situation that's going on in Cuba right now. In fact, clashes between the police and also the protesters have resulted in at least the death of one person, and multiple have been injured and also arrested as well as a result of this. So we're going to have to see where these protests will take Cuba, as these are some of the biggest protests that Cuba has ever seen since the Malocanazo of 1994. So that is a very interesting situation to take into account. Now, the next topic I want to talk about this week is actually that all is set for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics in 2021. So what has happened here is that the Tokyo 2020 Olympics opening ceremony is taking place on July 23rd, 2021. After a whole year, after it was postponed by COVID-19 due to it by the International Olympic Committee. This right here, it's still quite dangerous actually in Japan right now. But we're going to talk about the problems that we have been having to face during the COVID-19 in Japan. So we're going to be talking about that in just one moment. But first, let's talk about the Olympics this year, because it's going to be pretty exciting and we're going to see very new, interesting topics happening. And let's take a look at one particular athlete. And she's actually the youngest person who is going to be competing in the Olympics this year. She is a 12-year-old Syrian table tennis player by the name of Hend Zaza. Hend has qualified from a very war-torn country, and the fact that now she's able to play on the international stage is so incredible. So regardless of whether she actually wins a medal or not, Hen is such an inspiration to all of us, as she is the very first ever, the youngest ever Olympic table tennis player and the 5th youngest player in the history of the Olympics, the modern Olympics, the 5th youngest athlete in the Olympics. Now, she is truly an inspiration for all of us, and it's going to be super interesting to see what she does. It's going to be so awesome. Now, of course, I am super excited for this year's Olympics, but of course, I hope you are too, and this Olympics has not actually been without its problems and issues. So let's cover a couple of them. Starting with, the fact that it's cost quite a lot of money. It's a lot of budget overruns that have taken place, especially hampered and the problems exacerbated by COVID-19. So no wonder now the Olympics will be held behind closed doors for the first time in its entire history. It will be held behind closed doors with no audience. And even then as well, the medal ceremonies will be held specially with masks on, and also that instead of an Olympic member of the IOC expected to place the medal over the neck of the medalist, instead the medalist is expected to take it and place it over themselves in order to ease all the COVID-19 restrictions. So these are all taking place in the wake of the resurgent COVID-19 in Japan. So it's going to be exciting to see what happens, and I hope that the Olympics will go by smoothly and safely. So I truly cannot wait, and I hope you cannot wait too. So make sure to watch the Olympics this year. The Tokyo 2020 Olympics opening ceremony will be taking place on July 23rd at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, I believe, or is it 9 a.m.? 9 a.m. Eastern Time and 8 p.m. local Japan time. Make sure to check it out. It's going to be awesome. Now, the next topic I want to talk about is relating to the UEFA's European Football Championship Euro 2020. Now, once again, it's taking place in 2021 after it was postponed by a year by the UEFA, which is the preeminent European sports competition. So, Euro is actually a tournament with all of the national countries' football teams of Europe. So all of them, the France, Germany, Italy, UK, let's see, what else? Spain, Portugal, Andorra, Poland, all of those in the UEFA and more. So they'll all be competing in the Euro 2020. Now, the thing is, the final took place on July 11th between Italy and England. It was a very fierce competition all the way, and some people were, needless to say, pretty surprised by the fact that England managed to get its way here, as it hasn't had this successful since many, many years back. So, after the 90 minutes and extra time of the finals match, it was actually both sides tied 1-1. So this meant it was going to penalty shootouts. A very tense moment, given it's the final, which shows who's the champion of the Euro 2020. And England started off and scored 2 penalty kicks, which means that Italy scored 3, which means Italy is the champions of the European Football Championship 2020. It was a very celebratory moment for all the Italian fans, but it wasn't without some controversy, because shortly after the Italy win, a lot of hate messages started getting directed towards the penalty takers of the England football team who missed their shot. A lot of it was especially directed towards 19-year-old penalty taker Bukayo Saka, and a lot of them were very racial since he's black. So this is a very, very bad thing, what's going on with all of this hate messages, and I hope that the abuse can stop very soon, and that we can actually celebrate the players who did their best during the tournaments. All of this abuse has to stop, and we should celebrate the teams who made it this far, especially because England hasn't had this great hasn't had this great of an achievement in many years to make it to the final of the Euro 2020. So that's something I think we should all take into account when celebrating Euro 2020. And by the way, one last thing about Euro this year is that they actually held it in 11 different countries. Because it's meant to be a celebration this time around. It's a one-off event held in different countries of Uefa, and they did this to celebrate the fact that this is a celebration of all the European teams, commemorating how well they all did, and this is really a very good thing to do. Now let's take a look at some of the other stories this week, and we got two more which relate to sports. So let's take a look, I meant space, let's take a look at our space stories this week. So we begin with the fact that the founder of Amazon and the richest person in the world, you guessed it, Jeff Bezos, is going to space, along with the youngest and oldest people to go into space, aboard New Shepard, which is a rocket actually built by his own space company by the name of Blue Origin. Now, Blue Origin's New Shepard 4 is actually a wonderful mission that will be taking place on July 20th, if I have that right. And so what's going to be taking place is that we'll be seeing some brand new records being broken. If this Jeff Bezos rocket actually makes it and it's all successful. So first we have the youngest person to go to space, 18-year-old Oliver Damon, who's actually a Dutch student. And then we have the oldest person to go to space, who's 82-year-old Wally Funk, an aviator and goodwill ambassador. And finally, of course, the richest person to go to space, Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world with $210 billion. And along with these three, Jeff Bezos is actually taking his younger brother, Mark, along for the ride to space. So his plan here, Jeff Bezos' plan, is that if it's successful, then, well, guess what? It will open up the doors to conventional space tourism. And I say conventional because compared to Virgin Galactic and Richard Branson's very unconventional route of having a literal space plane carrying a space plane, and this time we have something different, where Jeff Bezos is actually going a lot of the routes of Elon Musk and SpaceX by having a gigantic rocket which will then fire up into space. And while Virgin Galactic's Spaceship 2 is going 9 miles up in the air, what Jeff Bezos is hoping to do is get it past the arbitrary Kármán line, 62 miles up, 100 kilometers up, and this means this is generally agreed by most experts and astrophysicists to be the start of outer space. So this is going to be so much fun, and I cannot wait to see how this turns out. It's going to be so much fun. So I really cannot wait to see this happen. Make sure to watch it on July 20th. It's going to be so much fun. So make sure to check it out. And of course, the final story of the week is that after a month of inactivity caused by malfunctioning, the Hubble Space Telescope is back in business. So, to be fair, the Hubble Mission Office were quite confused about a month ago when the Hubble Space Telescope inadvertently malfunctioned and then shut itself down. This meant that we weren't receiving any new transmissions. Although we were still in touch with it, it wasn't actually, doing what it does as a telescope, sharing images of the outer space with all of us here on Earth. So the thing is, this is quite interesting because after a lot of time that the Hubble team was nervously racking their brains on what exactly to do and how to handle the situation, eventually it transpired that there was an issue with the main Science Instrument Command and Data Handler, or SICNDH. So as you can tell by the fact this is the Science Instrument Command and the Data Handler, this is a very important part of the process. So eventually the Hubble mission office figured out what was going on. And the good thing is, back when Hubble launched, many years back, this meant that they had decided, just as a backup, to put a side B to the SICNDH. So they decided now the Hubble team switched from side A of the SICNDH to side B, and perfectly enough, the backup worked, which means that the Hubble Space Telescope is back in business, and the Hubble team surely celebrated. Now, in a message to members of the Space Telescope staff, the head of the Hubble Mission Office said that Hubble is back, and that he is excited to see Hubble going back to do what it does, exploring the depths of outer space. And again, I'm paraphrasing there, but I truly am very excited to see what Hubble has for us in store. So that is all of our news of the week for the week of July 11 to July 17, 2021. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with some more news of the week. Thank you, and goodbye.